Hello there guys, this is Commander Prime here, and as you may or may not be aware, I've just released a new trailer for Traitor Star Wars Story, the planet at the start of the war. This trailer has been a long time coming, and I'm happy to show you what I've been working on for the past many months, as well as showcasing the quality of Traitor going forward. So today I wanted to go through the process I went through in order to make the trailer, from the animation to the environments, the mechanics behind the cameras, audio and many other things as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Pre-production is something that I struggle with the most with when it comes to creating things like this, mainly because it takes a while for my brain to get started on something, but once it does it's fine, but it's getting that one main idea to create a basis for what I'm doing, and once I've done that I'm fine, but finding that basis is the thing I struggle with. Now I didn't know for a long time what I was going to do for this trailer, and I made a lot of different plans in my head and on paper as well. I even tried one of them inside of Unreal Engine, but I wasn't happy with it, so I disregarded it. However, I saw a YouTube video by a YouTuber called William Forcher. I hope I'm saying his name right, I apologise if not, his link's going to be down in the description. But you'll hear me talk about him a couple times in this video. Now he made a Halo video inside of Unreal Engine, and I used that as inspiration to make this trailer. And if you go and watch the original video, you'll see a lot of comparisons between what he's made and what I have done. Now the animation part of this video is going to split into two parts. The first being what I used to create the animation, which will be split into 3 sub-parts, and the second being why I chose to do it in this way, and the process of getting it working in the way you see in the video. So the first part, what did I use to create the animation? One of the programs or website that I use is called Mixamo. Mixamo, for those who are not aware, is a library full of 3D animations that you can use and download for your own projects, at no cost to you whatsoever. I didn't use this much as the animations are very basic, and if you use them too much in one scene it becomes very obvious and it makes the scene look robotic because all of the models are using the same animation. However, for this video I only used one animation from Mixamo's library, and that's the walk cycle animation. I'll explain later why. Now Mixamo has got one major limitation, and that is the fact that the default output is the T-pose, and the model that I'm using for this trailer and for Traitor as a whole are most from Battlefront 2. And they use different skeletons and poses, which leads to outputs like this when you retarget. As you can see, the animation works, but it clips and the bones are all in the wrong place. However, there is a fix for this. Mixamo has an auto-rigger system when you import your own characters, and while not perfect with the limbs slightly out of place and the finger bones being a little bit deformed, it's a lot better than what I had before, and it takes a lot less time to make it look as good as opposed to what I had before. So the main part of the animation where CL450 is looking at the environment and then turns around was created using a combination of 2 different application softwares, Glycon and APS, both links are down in the description. Now what these softwares do is take your VR kit and turn it into a mocap suit where you can create animations and use them in your scenes. You've heard me talk about Glycon before, as I've uploaded animation test videos where I'm using Glycon. However, for more complex mocap I decided to try APS as well, and this was the result. This was mainly because, like Mixamo, Glycon only exports using the T-pose, which then creates the same problem as Mixamo. Now, for top body shots, it will work fine because I can edit the animation to an acceptable standard to make it look good for the video. However, with finger shots, this is not possible, whereas APS does have a custom skeleton support thing, which makes it even better for things like fingers. So, why did I create Traitor in this way? Well, to put it simply, I hate keyframe animation with a passion. In order to create a small 1-minute animation inside of SFM, it would have taken me about an hour. It is true that if I stuck with keyframe animation, that this episode that I'm working currently on would not exist, and Traitor 3 would have been done by now, irrespective of my move to Unreal Engine, as I can import SFM models and animations into Unreal Engine. And in the event that I could not, I could always animate in Blender. But this just was not working for me in the way I was doing it. Now I understand the phrase practice makes perfect, and the more I would do it the better I would be. And I do have a test scene that I did with Traitor 3 and with keyframe animations. It even did the first trailer for Traitor was done in SFM, the first Traitor prequel one with keyframe animation, before I got my hands on Glycon. And while it does look better, especially in comparison with the previous episodes of Traitor where all the movements were all point to point and very robotic, however, it still didn't have that fluidity that I can create with mocap. And mocap makes it so much better, and the result output is so much more naturalistic to look at overall. You saw from Traitor 2 my attempt to do a walk cycle at the start of the episode, and while it was decent for my skills at the time, I attempted it again recently and I had not improved. So I decided to use VR mocap for the majority of my animation in Traitor and use Mixamo as and when I needed to. This means that the animation will be a lot more fluid, following more like a live action look with movements, as the animation will be following my real time movements rather than me manually trying to create movements as naturally as possible. Not that creating the animation this way was simple by any means, because it wasn't. There were many attempts at me creating various different mocap animations, some looking good and others not so good, as you can see on the screen now. A couple of them with a little tweaking looked decent, however not good enough for me to use in a production piece, but for testing purposes it was getting there. But then I would get one that looked downright awful, and this went on for ages and I still haven't got it perfect. Now we move on to the environment for the trailer. Now this is what took me the longest, because this is what's going to be the precedent for what the look of the world is going to be. Now it's a little bit easier for this trailer because a lot of the background is covered by the depth of field, which makes the background look blurry, and that makes a lot of detail, however, look blurry and it masks it a bit. However, it doesn't mean that I can leave the environment blank, as that would not look good. So the models in the environment are a mix from Battlefront 2 as well as a program called Quixel Megascans. Battlefront 2 models from the game that I use in my scene look like Geonosis, and that's where I get the main look from. However, what is Quixel Megascans? Well, it's a library a bit like Mixamo, but instead of animation, it's models of real life objects that the owners have scanned and turned into high quality 3D models that people can use in their games and or animations. Now, normally you would have to buy the models, and they're not cheap. However, they've recently teamed up with Epic Games and Unreal Engine, and now everyone who has an Unreal Engine license, so that's connected with their Epic Games account, now has full access to the library of Megascans models. The landscape was done using a website called Texture Generator Online, which is your basic texture generator website. However, if you use the program properly and set the settings correctly, you can actually get really good height maps. Now, what's a height map, you may be asking? Well, it's a black and white texture that when you plug into Unreal Engine, creates a landscape in the form of a texture. It's not perfect by any means, and it does need touch up after you import it, but it certainly does a good enough job for setting the basis of a level design. I have a tutorial using Texture Generator Online and how it works within Unreal Engine on my channel, so if you are interested, then go and watch that video. The texture of the landscape is just the sand texture that I acquired off Megascans. Because of the depth of field blur and the detail in the texture, you don't really notice. The images that are shown on the screen now is the development I went through when creating this scene. I started off within the area that the camera is located in first, so the big rock where 0450 is standing. I did this because I found it much easier to create camera angles first, so I can then compare it to the reference that I was looking for and then use that to then populate the environment afterwards. Most of the big models stay pretty much where they are throughout the development process of these images, but it's the details and smaller path models that change between the images. I wanted to have the small path type environment running through the rocks. One reason was to add some environmental storytelling to try and say, well, this is where I am, this is where I need to be. However, the main reason why I was trying to fill up the scene was so you can see from the first images, without a path, it looks very plain, being just one colour, and even when you add a depth of field in there, it looks just as bad, if not worse. So I added some rocks and stones for Megascans, and I think it turned out rather well personally. And something you may also notice is that path that I have created is actually the same path that the thumbnail is actually made out of. Lighting the scene was something that was also crucial when creating this environment. This environment is not that difficult because there are made desert type environments built into Unreal Engine on YouTube, as well as a lot of reference from the actual location, Geonosis, in actual media in Star Wars as well as the Clone Wars. So making the lighting look like Geonosis wasn't an issue, but the details within were. Lighting in Unreal Engine is something I've always struggled with, and sometimes I have been working on something but I get nowhere with it and end up scrapping the whole thing and starting again because I don't like the output. It does help though that because I'm using a RTX GPU, I can then use DirectX 12 and ray tracing to make the shadows look even better. However, this does not mean that lighting is an easy task. Just a small change of position of the main source light could change the scene from looking really bad to really good, and vice versa. When you've eventually made your light source looking nice, you can change your skylight or your fog, which is necessary to make your scene work. But then it messes up your main light, and you then have to go back and fix that again, and so it goes on. However, once you get the lighting right, the difference is night and day, and you go from having a scene that looks okay with decent lighting to a scene that looks outstanding with intricate and detailed lighting. Lighting a scene is one thing that makes me most excited when finishing lighting a scene, and the result is so worth it every single time. Now, I said before how the most important lighting is the most important thing to making your scene look really good, and while it is, it's pretty much meaningless without having your camera set up properly. And that is what's going to capture all of the work that you spent over the past several hours constructing your environment. Now, cameras, much like lighting, have many different settings that change and make a big difference, such as your focal length, shutter speed, focus, etc. However, the difference with cameras is that aside from certain things like your focus length, most of the settings you can change once, and you basically have an idea for your scene, and you can set that as your precedent. And you generally don't have to change them again. The only problem with cameras, however, is that if you want multiple cameras capturing different areas of your scene in a different way, so for example, if you want one camera to capture a wide angle of your scene and then have another camera to focus on the smaller area where your character is located, you have to set them up with different settings each time to focus on those specific situations. Even just a slight change in the camera's position can mean you have to change the entire focus plane just a little to keep your character in focus, and once you've done that, you may have to change your shutter speed and your focal length as well. Now, for the trailer, it wasn't too bad because the main area in which I was capturing was very small, and the tracking I did on the camera was so small that I could easily keyframe the camera to move if it was necessary, and then only move things like the focus plane a small amount, if at all. Now, on the topic of keyframing, you probably didn't notice, or maybe you did, that there was no camera in that whole trailer that didn't have any movement to it, as you can see on the screen now. Each camera had some form of keyframe to it. Now, some of the movements were really big and obvious, such as the walk side profile. However, other shots like when CL450 is turning at the end, or when he walks up to the camera and all you can see is his hand in his pelvis, with those two shots, the camera was moved ever so slightly in that shot for the main purpose of doing this was because if I kept the camera in one place, it would mean that in one place the shot would look fine, but in others it wouldn't. So this is the way of me getting the best of both worlds in this instance. Another time I use a slight camera movement is when the clone is turning at the end. Normally if the camera was set to no movement, CL450 would be lined up in the center, but when he was facing one way, but when he was facing the opposite way, it would be off the center because of how the animation was recorded. So this means that a slight change in the camera position needed to happen, and again, normally you wouldn't notice unless you were paying attention. It's a subtle change, unless you were closely paying attention you wouldn't notice it. Rendering inside of Unreal Engine is the most crucial thing to get correct, because if there's one setting that is not correct, then all of the work that you've done up until this point will be worthless. Luckily, so long as you have your camera set up correctly, there's only a couple of things you need to ensure that your output is going to be correct. First of all though, I need to mention there are two ways you can export in Unreal Engine, that is either using the sequencer renderer or movie render queue. Now, I've used both of them, and I have to say the movie render queue is quite a lot better, not only because you can get much better renders from it, but you also have more control over your render output such as anti-aliasing and others, which you don't have when you're doing the sequencer renderer. So the first thing you need to take into account when rendering is the output format. Now, Unreal can export in either AVI or a series of image sequence formats. Now, I use image sequence because not only do I get higher quality output because it's rendering each frame individually on its own instead of part of a video, but also if there is a duff frame or something at the start or at the end, you can go in and delete it before delete it before you go and import it into Premiere or After Effects, rather than importing the video and trying to get the framing exactly right for that video. Secondly, you need to set your frame rate and export resolution. Now, if you have set your camera and sequence up correctly, it should automatically choose the correct settings, but in the event that they don't, you can change them from the drop-down boxes. So for me, I chose to render my sequence at 4K at 24 FPS, because I wanted the highest quality video, but I also wanted it to look cinematic as well, which is why I chose these settings. If you were doing this yourself, remember, the higher resolution and frame rates, and the longer the clip, it's going to take longer for your video to render. However, the good thing about rendering an image sequence is that if you have to stop at some point, make a note of the frame that it stopped at, and when you come back later you can tell Unreal to render from a specific frame, which solves that problem, where with a video it's a lot harder to do this. Now I chose Premiere Pro to edit the trailer in because that's what I'm used to having to edit my own videos in the past, as well as previous Traitor videos as well. So it makes sense that I use this to edit this trailer. I could have used something like DaVinci Resolve or Sony Vegas as well, which would have looked good as well, but if not maybe slightly better. But I didn't want to learn a new software just for this, especially considering switching to Unreal Engine to create Traitor has taken a lot of learning in itself. So first of all, I needed to set the sequence settings in Premiere. I rendered the clips in Unreal Engine as a 4K resolution and 16:9 ratio. However, I quickly learned after rendering my first iteration of the trailer and uploading it to YouTube, it lacked that cinematic feel to it. Now half of that was the post-processing, which I will get on to in a second. However, the other main thing was the aspect ratio in which the trailer was being shown. As I said before, I uploaded the first iteration in 60:9 ratio, which wasn't working, and after some advice from others, it didn't look like it was working. And after some advice from others, I decided to try and render it in 21:9 ratio, which is what most films and TV shows render at. And after I did that, it looked much more cinematic. So once I got into the sequence settings it was then time to build the trailer using the clips and music I had. Now, my process of editing when making the trailers is a little different to when I'm making my own videos or editing the episodes themselves. When I'm editing trailers, I first build the video using clips and create a rough draft for how I want the trailer to look, and then I add music underneath and move the clips around, making them longer or shorter so they then fit with the music. Whereas when I'm making my own videos, a lot of the time, the music has just been put into the background just to add a bit of ambience. But with trailers, I like to fit the music around what's being shown. The next thing I did is post-processing effects. Now, as I used a video for the basis from this, and it's again that YouTube channel William Forcher. Again, I hope I'm saying his name right, but again, I'll leave him in the description so you can check out his videos. He's a really intelligent and helpful guy who has got a number of videos on his channel related to Unreal Engine, and he's helped me so much with making this trailer. So if you're looking to start using Unreal Engine for cinematics, then I would highly recommend checking out his channel. So I started off doing some color correction. There wasn't much I needed to do because the overall look of the clips out of Unreal Engine didn't look bad. However, there was some little tweaks that I made which made a lot of difference. It mainly consisted of changing the exposure and contrast to make the video look a little bit brighter, and then tweaking the shadows and the highlights to give the video a little bit more of a punchy effect. Also added a film grain to add that cinematic look, and I originally did add a lens flare. However, it did look a little bit weird because it was just static on the screen. So when I come to actually creating the episode itself, I'll probably test around adding a lens flare in Unreal rather than post. I also added some bloom into the background as well. It's a subtle effect, but it does make the clone pop out in the front a bit more. Once I got the video where I wanted it, I'd done a draft which I was happy with, I then went to do my final render. The render settings were pretty much what you would expect. 4K in a 21:9 ratio, maximum render quality, 120 megabits per second bitrate, and AAC audio with 5.1 surround. However, I did notice there was an option for HDR, so I thought I'd give that a try for the video and export the video in HDR to see if it improved the quality at all. However, while it did look good, it was significantly darker than if I'd had it turned off, so I just left it the way it was before. So I hope I've given you an insight into my creation of this trailer as well as Traitor as a whole going forward. I'm so glad that I can now continue to work on creating the series bigger and better than I have been able to before, not only by using Unreal Engine, but by being able to use my VR for motion capture to make the animation much better and much more fluid. It is now full steam ahead for me to create this episode of Traitor to show you what I've been working on over the past few months. So that's all it for me. I hope you enjoyed and I shall see you later. Bye!